In this video, I want to introduce an NPM package I created that makes it easier to create web components. It is heavily inspired by the lit package, but it has a number of advantages, and the top three are that it is less than half the size of the lit library. It has a cleaner, less noisy syntax that doesn't require surrounding JavaScript expressions with $ curly brace syntax, and it provides automatic two-way data binding that I'll demonstrate in more detail in future videos. So let's take a look at how we could implement the counter component that we saw in vanilla web components and in lit in the previous videos. In the HTML on the right, you see that I have a script tag that includes the definition of my counter component implemented with the wrec library. And then I'm using two instances of that component, one for a level that starts at 1 and one for a score that starts at 0. So jumping over to the implementation, we see that I am importing the wrec class and then CSS and HTML, which are tags for tag template literals, just to give me syntax highlighting and formatting of that code. I'm extending the class wrec instead of extending HTML element or lit element. Wrec, just like lit element, extends from HTML element. Then I have a static list of properties that my component uses, label, which is a string, and count, which is a number. I have a static property CSS that defines the styling for this component, and this is the same styling that we saw in the previous examples. And down at the bottom, I have a static property called HTML, which defines the HTML for this component. And this is where things start to look a bit different. Notice that my onClick doesn't have an @ sign in front of it. Wrec is just looking for attributes whose name begins with on, and it assumes that what follows that is the name of an event, and the casing doesn't matter, so I could use a lowercase c on click if I wanted to. And then the value is either the name of a method in this class, or it's a JavaScript expression. And that will be evaluated every time the event fires. Notice I don't need to surround that expression with $ curly brace syntax, and so clicking the decrement button is just subtracting 1 from the count, and clicking the increment button is just adding 1 to the count. The disabled attribute just needs to have a value that is a Boolean expression. I don't need to have a $ in front of that name the way that I do if I'm using the lit library. The span that displays the current value of the count, again, does not need $ curly brace wrapping around the expression. I just need to reference this .count. And finally, at the end, the same thing we saw in the lit version, I'm using a ternary expression to output either single digit or double digit based on the value of the count. You might be wondering, how does wrec determine when I want to display or use a JavaScript expression? And the answer is that it's just looking for attributes or text content of elements that contain this dot anywhere in the text. Now, you might be thinking, well, what if I want to have literal text that has this dot in it? Well, it only treats that as a JavaScript expression if this dot is followed by a valid JavaScript identifier. If you have text content that has sentences in it, perhaps like, I like this, do you like it too? Well, I would have this dot appearing in that text, but I'd probably have a space after the period, and so it wouldn't be confused because it's not followed by a JavaScript identifier. If you ever do run across a case where you want to have this dot not be treated as a JavaScript expression, then you just use 2 dots instead of 1. At the very bottom, you see I have a call to counter_rec.register, and that is registering the name of the custom element to be the kebab case version of the class name. So in this case, it would be all lowercase counter-rec. And that feels better to me because I'm not allowing the custom element name to be dramatically different from the name of the class that implements it. Over on the right, we see the running example. I have the 2 counters just like we saw in previous examples, and clicking on the buttons works as expected. If the number reaches double digits, the text changes to tell me about that. In future videos, I'll cover even more features of the wrec library, but for now, head over to the NPM page for this package and note the link that says My Blog. If you click on that, you'll go to my blog page that has extensive documentation on the wrec library and even has working examples. If I click on nested web components and scroll down a bit, I see an interesting color picker example where I can change the values of the sliders, and notice the color of the text is changing. I can bump up the size of the text and then change the color further. What's amazing about this is how little code was required to implement this. So please check it out, and I'll cover this in more detail in future videos.